So Merrill's going to be talking about his many finds here, and I'm very excited to hear about it. And our other speaker is Dennis Knobloch. I've known Dennis for many, many years as well, all through high school. We went to high school together, probably junior high as well. And Dennis has brought his knowledge and expertise to tell us many, many things, I'm sure. So on that note, I will turn it over to Mr. Prange and let him get the show on the road.
Can everyone hear me without a microphone?
No.
But they heard you to say that. Something.
What'd you say?
It's on.
How about now?
Good.
Too loud, too soft, too perfect?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for all coming out on what is really not that pleasant day. I'll start with a brief overview of the various Illinois cultural periods and their presence in Monroe County. This part of the program will be a little skewed because I have almost all my collection from about a 10 square mile area, so naturally I'm much more familiar with that area. But I'll try and give you a little knowledge on the county as a whole. And then I'll turn it, that'll probably take 3 or 4 hours. Then, no, I hope about 25 or 30 minutes. Then Dennis will discuss some finds that were made when they relocated the village of Valmeyer to the bluff tops, and naturally did a lot of excavating, and some very interesting things came up from that. And then I'll finish by showing you some artifacts that are pretty rare in Monroe County, and you won't see them in a lot of local collections. I do want to start briefly by stating that I'm not an expert. I have no formal training in archaeology or anthropology. I have gleaned quite a bit of information from reading, and even more from the many archaeologists who have come down over the years to view and take samples from my collection. Because I record all my finds, number each site, number each thing that I find with dates and things like that, and collate the information. My collection is of great value to researchers. Even broken pieces of pottery or broken point are of great value to them because it gives them the information they need. Whether the point is complete or not is really not germane. And in all honesty, before I start, I want to admit to being ambivalent about hobbies. My hobbies are fascinating, and I could talk for them forever. Your hobbies are probably boring. And I think probably we all feel that way. So if any of you get bored and wish to take a quiet nap, I won't be offended. Yeah, quiet. I have too much paper here. Indian presence in Monroe County lasted from about 12,000 BC until about 1800 AD. This time frame covered 7 major periods of Indian culture. The earliest period is known as Paleo-Indian, and reigned from about 12,000 to 6,000 BC. Paleo culture was based on hunting economy. Population was small. Family groups migrated with the large game animals they subsisted on. This was the Pleistocene megafauna area during the last ice age. Had mammoths, mastodons, tailor buffalo, which were much bigger than our present bison, huge moose and elk, many species which of course became extinct at the end of the time. They followed their herds. You will find spear points in Monroe County. You will find some tools for skinning and dressing hides. They did carry flint axes. Their points are long and narrow and can be identified by a concave base, which is often has channels cut into it on the wide sides. They call it fluting. In many areas of the country, bone tools are found. However, Illinois' wet climate destroys bone relatively quickly, and I have no paleo bone tools in my collection, and I don't know of any. That's not to say there isn't any, I just am not aware of them. On the local level, a very large agate basin point was found near Valmeyer many years ago. It's a very beautiful piece of work by some chert that was carried from a long way away. It's about 8 or 9 inches long. It's probably worth an extreme lot of money. Unfortunately, it was not found by me, so I can't show it. And the person I have isn't going to tell anybody where he found it either. I will show you these 2 points. This is a small agate basin point. You can note the fluting on the side. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you very much.
This is an Allen point. There again, you will note the fluting on the bottom. These points are from the transitional period as Paleo was ending, and the next archaic phase began. They could be very early archaic, they could be very late Paleo, but they are close enough to Paleo that you can see the difference.
Merrill, a few minutes ago you mentioned the word chert. I'm not familiar with that, so.
Call it flint.
Oh, okay.
This is an end scraper from the same period. End scrapers were used for dressing hides, skinning out animals, things like that. They remain basically unchanged for the next 12,000 years. They worked, so they didn't get rid of them. Okay, thank you, Cheryl. In between the Paleo and the Archaic, there was a short period that used to be considered part of one or the other. Now it's actually called the Dalton phase, and it's kind of a transition. This is a Dalton point. Again, deep U, serrated edges. This is the classic Dalton. And it ranged from about probably 9,000 years ago. Next culture began about 7,000 BC and lasted until about 1,000 BC. These people lived in small groups, and they were a little less migratory than Paleo. The megafauna were gone. About 9,000 BC, the ice age started retreating, the ice sheet started retreating, and smaller game came in. And while they were still migratory, they moved on a seasonal basis in a smaller area. They subsisted by gathering plants, foodstuffs, in addition to hunting and fishing. They would perhaps spend autumn in the hickory and oak forests gathering nuts, drying some of them. In spring, they would move along the lakes and the swamps for the waterfowl migration period. In summer, they would fish, gather edible roots, berries, plants. And in winter, they would move into the shelter of rock overhangs or caves or narrow hollows along the bluff for protection from the worst of the winter winds and snows. Hunting was conducted by them on a year-round basis on whatever was available. The groups did tend to return to the same seasonal area at the same time each year. Spear points are now wider. Wider, heavier made. And they were still used for hunting large game, but they were also using smaller spears for deer and things like that. We come along with some new things now. The axes are no longer made of flint, they're now made of heavy stone, periphery, basalt, and things like that. This is one of the things that does point to archaic, because later Indians no longer used that type of axe. They did spend some time, they did bury their dead, sometimes in stone box graves. On a local basis, this I want to show you is found locally. This is a Cossatot River Point. It's 9,500 years old. It was found in the bottoms near Falls. Other points. Sometimes after 10 years of walking, you have a really lucky day. And this happens to be an archaic spearhead cache from the late Paleo period, probably about 3000 BC. Someone plowed up an old farm road that hadn't been plowed for 100 years, and with the plow pulled them out and stacked them back up for me to stumble across. In the false bottoms, a series of archaic sites run in about a 2 to 3 mile long arc from near the present railroad track southwest to the sea. There are some pottery fragments found along these sites showing that the woodland people also lived there because the archaic people did not yet have any pottery. And the size of this site and the amount of stuff found there suggests a fairly large population. Archaic was succeeded by the woodland sites. This used to be known as early, middle, and late woodland. Now the archaeologists have early woodland, late early woodland, early middle, middle, late middle, and early late woodland, and middle late woodland, and terminal late woodland / Mississippian. They just make that crap up so they can feel superior to the rest of us. I think. Early woodland ran from about 600 to 200 BC. These people were more apt to have semi-permanent villages, however they were smaller and more spaced out. We do find 2 new inventions among their relics. We have chert hoes. They're relatively small, but it's beginning of agriculture. And they're not really planting crops yet, but what they're doing is pruning the prairies because some of the prairie grasses are very edible, and I suspect that they would prune the non-edibles around them so they would have more growth. But it was the beginning of agriculture. They also came up with an early form of pottery. This is an early woodland. This one actually has some decoration on it, some dentate stamping and notching in it for decorative purposes. So these 2 things show us that 1, they're no longer completely dependent on foraging, and 2, they're probably not quite as mobile because clay pots are relatively fragile, and I can't picture them using them and carrying them over long distances. Early woodland in Monroe County. There's an early woodland site northwest of Columbia in the bottom. It's pretty large. In fact, I think there's a early woodland phase called the Columbia phase named after it. The sherds I told you are from one of my sites near Falls. A couple of my sites yield early woodland. Early woodland points always have a stem, or almost always have, and the stem is almost always square. That's one of the things. Different types, but the square, straight-sided stem is usually early woodland. Here one was broken, then made into a scraper. And this one also was originally an arrowhead. When it breaks, they would, rather than start over, would re-chip the end and use it for dressing hides, etc., etc. The early woodland people did build large burial mounds throughout Illinois. They were succeeded by middle woodland, obviously enough, began about 100 BC and lasted to about 400 AD. These people lived in what tended to be permanent year-round villages and actually planted and raised squash and some other crops, beans. So they were actually doing more agriculture. Their spears are no longer thrown by hand. They're now smaller. Their spears, instead of being 8 or 10 feet long, are now 3 or 4 foot long, and they're thrown with an atlatl, which is a spear thrower. It resembled more than anything else a golf club. You would lay the spear shaft along the shaft of the golf club, which in this case would have been bent a little bit for a handle, against the heavy end of the club, and would throw it like this. And the spear thrower worked the same way as a baseball bat or a golf club does. We all know that you can hit a baseball 3 or 4 times further than you can throw it. You can hit a golf ball probably 10 times farther than you can throw it. It all comes down to the law of motion, radial motion, if you will. If you go like this, my shoulder moves 2 or 3 inches. The end of my hand moves a couple of feet. If I had a 4 foot thing, it would move 7 or 8 feet. That increase in velocity makes the spear go further, faster. But faster, it remains more accurate, and it has more killing power when it hits. So this was a major thing. It was also much safer because, to be quite honest, Taylor buffalo probably weighed 5,000 pounds and had big horns. And when you had to run up to him with a spear 6 or 8 foot long and stab it, there was a good chance that he was going to turn around and kill you before he died. So this allowed them to throw it and then run away. The buffalo would bleed to death and come back. So they were not really savages. They were thinking. Yeah, I'll show them in a second. Their pottery is now highly decorated in a lot of cases. You notice this one is stamped from the back to make raised nodes. There's some more samples you can look at later showing some of the very thing. As evidence of widespread trade now, we find shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the upper Midwest, and church that were brought in from other states. Stone pipes, pottery figurines, and bones, stone, and metal decorative items appear. Grooved axes have been replaced by ungrooved axes called celts. Thank you, Cheryl. There was no groove. It was held in the hand or possibly socketed into a bone or wood tool, much like a present-day chisel, some of which are socketed into wood handles. On the local basis, this one first. This is a classic point. This is a Snyder's point. If you ask someone to draw you an arrowhead, that's what most people would draw. That was one of the hallmarks of Middle Woodland. The other site that Cheryl has in her hand is a little more rare. It's called a Prisker diamond. It began in the very late early woodland and moved into the early Middle Woodland, but it is more connected with the Middle Woodland culture in most people's minds. Let's see what else here. I have 3 sets of notes, so I have to jump back and forth. Sorry. A lot of Middle Woodland sites in the American bottoms. Fortunately me, there's a small one about 200 feet from my house, right behind the Falls Church. There's a large complex of Middle Woodland sites surrounding the non-existent now village of St. Philip's. And this site probably is a half-mile wide and 2 or 3 miles long. And of course, this isn't one continuous site, but you find site here, as they move their villages. One of the strange things I notice about Middle Woodland sites is that they occur on higher ridges than do the late woodland and the archaic. This was probably not due to any cultural differences, but rather to the river meandering east and west, high and low, over the various centuries.
Keep the water out.
Just a couple of them. You can hold them up, please.
And there's springs. That's necessary.
These points here are Adena points. They are one of the other hallmarks of Middle Woodland. You'll notice that the chert, if you look later, they come in a variety of colors, and this is showing that they were trading in areas further away. Middle Woodland was succeeded by Late Woodland, which ran from 400 to about 1000 AD. And this was a period of decline from the Middle Woodland high point. Pottery was less decorative, fewer styles are found. It appears that they were more hunting, dependent on hunting and gathering, and less on agriculture at this time, possibly due to prolonged drought. The bow and arrow now made its appearance, as did discoidals. You want to grab a discoidal, Cheryl? Yeah, grab that. This is discoidal, also known as a chunky stone. When the white settlers got here, the Indians were using this for a game. One man would roll the discoidal, the others would shoot their bows and arrows or their spears where they thought it would stop, and they would wager things on it, things they could do without. Deer hides, beaver pelts, extra wives. A great many of the tribes were actually polygamous. They had more than one wife. But my understanding is it was the wife's idea because, to be quite honest, Indian men had it made. They did the hunting, the fishing, protecting the village, and damn little work. The women did the butchering, they did the hide carrying, they did the cultivating, they did the harvesting and the planting of the crops, and just about all the crappy jobs, and the men pretty well had it made. And if a woman had a couple of children, she actually did need someone to help her, so polygamy was actually to the woman's benefit, and that's why they actually promoted it.
What's new?
Okay. I digressed on Chunky Stone, now I have to find where I was. In line with the changes in food sources, villages again are smaller and less permanent. They probably had to move around more in the interest of hunting. On the local level, the local points are often corner notched or side notched. One is a cups point, the other one is a rice side notched point. The side notches are indicative of the late woodland culture. They also tended to use plummets, and plummets are often found along marshes and swamps. One theory says that they were net weights for throwing nets. They're made out of iron ore or hematite. It's very hard metal. I can't believe they would spend days making something this nice to use for a net weight that really probably would get lost every time you threw the net into the swamp. But whatever it was, they may also have been used as bola stones, similar to the South American bolas, which are several cords tied together with weights again. You could twirl and entangle the game legs of deer and other animals when they came to drink. A large number of the late woodland sites are along the old marshes and swamps, and that's where many of the plummets are found. They also did some cultivation. They planted squash, which is not native to Illinois. They also utilized marsh elder, maygrass, goosefoot, knotweed, all of which are native to this area. Does anybody know what food goosefoot is producing now? If any of you are trendy people and up on the latest health foods, you may have heard of quinoa. Quinoa comes from a Peruvian strain of goosefoot. So you haven't really done anything new when you eat it. You just regressed 2,000 years. So just so you know that. No, it is high in starch, as was maygrass and these other things. They did not have wheat, but a lot of these did produce a starchy flour that was very similar and probably was used very similar to present-day wheat. Following and in some areas coexisting with late woodland was the Mississippian period. This was another real high point in Indian culture. Agriculture again became the staple of their food. They now started planting corn, beans, squash, melons among their principal crops. Large villages with hundreds of inhabitants or thousands of inhabitants were built. Elaborate ceremonial sites sprung up. The site at Cahokia and its many mounds is a Mississippian site. These larger sites were surrounded by smaller villages engaged in crop raising to support the population center. Trade routes are again open. We find shells from Florida, Alabama. That's a local shell. Got that conch shell whorl. There you go. This is a whorl from a conch shell. That's the center after the rest of the conch shell was cut up for beads. This whorl was left and would be made into a pendant. They also use local shells, mussel shells. This one is from the river and is made into a hole. It was not yellow. Once upon a time I thought that coating it with lacquer would help preserve it. It did, but it also turned it a hideous yellow instead of the natural white. Mea culpa. Pottery was very decorative and incised with geometric designs and renderings of real or imaginary animals. Later on, you will see a bunch of Mississippi pottery in the center of that table. All different kinds of pottery styles. They have what is known as the Mississippian plate, which there's a fragment of there that actually was shaped and looked like our present-day dinner plate. Stone effigies, fancy pipes were again in vogue. The dead were buried with ceremony, and in some cases elaborate grave goods are interred with them. Mississippian lasted from 900 to 1500 AD and seemed to suddenly disappear, probably due to overpopulation and climate change destroyed their ability to feed. This was about the time of the year a prolonged drought left the buffalo, which had been moved west of the Mississippi. Buffalo appeared back in Illinois at that time. Given that their crops were failing, it may have become easier to break up into family groups and begin hunting. Probably the real problem was that they had gotten away from cultivating maygrass, knotweed, etc., the things that were native here, and were now planting corn, beans, squash, none of which are native to America. They are tropical or subtropical plants. In prolonged bad climate, they probably simply could not feed themselves anymore. By the time white explorers arrived, the vast complex of Cahokia was deserted, and the area Indians they met had no real memory of what happened to it. I do want to show you Mississippian. This is Mississippian. Notice it's much larger than the woodland holes. They were probably digging deeper. As those of you with a farm background know, corn requires pretty extensive cultivation. It is planted at a certain depth, so their holes are larger. There's a couple of Mississippian stone holes on the other table. I have some at home that are 18 inches long. They were really heavy. And strangely enough, the heavy holes made of limestone come from a site that has black gumbo. I imagine they needed a heavier stone that was less prone to break to do the cultivating. The other thing is, this is the one object, this is missing. I told my children and my wife that if they sell the whole collection today, I kicked a bucket, that's fine. But I went down, kept, that is a Mississippian chisel, and a very fine Mississippian chisel. When I found it, it was perfect, and one day I made the mistake of bringing something like this, and it managed to get chipped on one corner. But it's my favorite thing out of the 4,000 or 5,000 pieces that I have. This is one thing I do want to keep. And this brings us to the final culture, the historic period, and in some ways it's no longer a truly native culture because it's been affected by the European explorers. The voyage of Joliet and Marquette serves as a beginning point because that's when white people first set foot in Illinois. Trade goods are now mixed with stone, relics, glass beads, trade silver jewelry, decorations cut. Yeah, just hold up some beads. Instead of making beads from shells or wood or bone, they are now trading for beads. Most of these beads were made in Italy at a very large bead producing manufacturing base. They then sold them to the French and English, who traded them for steel knives, steel axes and hoes. Fish hooks are now found made of steel. Copper cones are used for decoration. Sites you find lead musket balls, the sprues to which you were attacked. And strangely enough, in a country full of chert, they now brought in chert from France and England. When you find chert squares like this, of this yellow cast, they are flintlock, from flintlock rifles. The flintlock rifles were used mostly for psychological purposes. It takes a really good trained soldier to load and fire a flintlock rifle once every minute. A good Indian archer with a quiver in that 1 minute could shoot somewhere between 25 and 30 arrows. So what they would do is they would fire the gun to scare them and then run charging at him with the bayonet and hope that the Indian didn't get his arrows going. but they were mostly really more of a status symbol than a useful weapon until they developed breech-loading weapons. Northern Monroe County was inhabited by people affiliated with the Cahokia group. The Kaskaskia and Tamaroa Indians were near Fort Kaskaskia and later by Fort Charters, so they have sites in there, which I will get into a little bit later. Before I turn this over to this, however, I do want to say one brief thing because it's important to understand this. And the the historic Indians actually had seasonal villages. They would have 3 villages. In the summer, was their largest and most permanent one, and here they would plant their crops in the spring. In June, they would leave some women behind to care for the crop and take care of the very old and young, and some warriors to protect them in the village. And the majority would go on an annual bison hunt. They'd establish a temporary village near the bison, kill the number they needed, skin them out, dry them, and then after 6 or 8 weeks, they would return back to the summer village. After fall harvest, they would break into large groups and move to the various winter hunting camps. These were spread out so that they did not all overhunt any area. The houses there were also semi-permanent and would be returned to each winter by the same group. There's a very large historic site complex that lies north of Fort Charters in Monroe and Randolph County. A good part of it, actually, fortuitously for me, lays on farm owned by my brother and his 2 sons. There was a lot of excavations done there years ago in an adjoining farm. The one that I most remember, they found a Michigamea chief lying there with a brandy bottle under each arm. That was his most prized possession, evidently. I'd like to take 2 minutes yet, before I turn this over, to discuss the historic record of the Kaskaskia Indians, because it sheds light on the why and how of the migration, and it provides hints on what might have happened to people like the Mississippians. Can anyone tell me where the Kaskaskia Indians came from? Yes?
Illinois.
Very good. I was hoping someone could say Kaskaskia so I could say, wrong. Illinois Indians were a loose confederation of tribes. The only real thing they had in common was that they all spoke Algonquian, which is an Indian dialect from the Algonquian tribe, which came from the Great Lakes area. Nearly all the Illini villages were along the Mississippi and Illinois River and their major tributaries. The Maroa, Cahokia, and Kaskaskia were centered on the upper Illinois River near Utica, present-day Ottawa, Peru, Illinois. The Peoria, Taparoa, Minguena, Tamaroa, and some tribe with 14 names in their letter that I just call the C tribe because I can't begin to pronounce this word, were on the west side of the Mississippi, northeast Missouri, and up along the Des Moines River into Iowa. The Michigamea and Chiposa were in northeast Arkansas. And migration to Kaskaskia were affected by the advent of French traders and by pressure from other tribes, and the two are kind of interlocked. The grand village of the Kaskaskia was at Utica. In 1673, the village had 74 lodges. Lodges had 2, sometimes 3 families, so we're probably talking about 350 or 400 individuals. In 1683, the French built a trading post there called Fort St. Louis, again up near Utica, Illinois, and encouraged other Illinois tribes to come there to trade. Notably, the Peoria, Taparoa, and Merrill tribe and Illini tribes moved there. The area also attracted the Wea, Piankashaw, bands of Shawnee from Kentucky and Tennessee and southern Illinois, and Miami from Ohio and Indiana. Of course, trouble was brewing. By 1689, this area now housed about 18,000 Native American people. 2 years later, by 1691, surprise, surprise, the area was denuded of hunting and the forests were denuded of firewood. So the Kaskaskia moved to Lake Pinatu, where they were joined by the Peoria tribe. The area there took the name Peoria, and it is where basically where Peoria, Illinois is now this way. In 1700, more internal squabbles. The Kaskaskia moved to the Des River in Missouri. We all know where that's at in South St. Louis. They were joined there by some of the Tamaroa, who had their main village in St. Clair County near the present city of Cahokia. In 1703, both tribes moved back into Illinois and settled on the river, which eventually took their name, Kaskaskia. There they began a close relationship with the Michigammia. Remember them? They were from Arkansas. Just one happy family. The area vacated by the Tamaroa was then occupied by the Cahokia Indians, who settled near the French fort for protection and trade. Okay. Both of the Tamaroa and the Cahokia tribes doubtless hunted, farmed, and lived at least seasonally in northwest Monroe County. In 1720, due to overpopulation near the French village of Kaskaskia, the Kaskaskia Indians were asked to move up the river. They moved about 15 miles and settled in the confluence area, the watersheds of the Kaskaskia and the Big Muddy River. The Michigammia moved and had a large village area north of Fort Charters, and much of it was, as I said, was in Monroe County. They were joined there by the Peoria Indians, who also moved a lot. The relics we show you were from this village site. The Peoria moved on to Missouri by 1780. By 1800, the Michigammia also had moved west into Missouri. The Kaskaskia got into a fight, long-standing fight, generations old, with the Shawnee. The Shawnee won, and the few remaining Kaskaskia Indians moved to Sand Ridge in Jackson County, and then shortly to Missouri. By 1828, they were in Kansas. There they were reunited with the Peoria, the Wea, Pinky Shaw, and the remainder of some other Illini tribes. They were all moved to Oklahoma Indian Territory in 1867. In 1945, an Indian office census showed that the remains of the Illini, along with the Wea and Piankashaw, totaled 400 individuals. They'd come a long way down. In Monroe County itself, virtually no Indians remained on a permanent basis after 1800. The killing, however, continued for several more decades. The Fox, Shawnee, and Kickapoo were warlike, unfriendly tribes, having destroyed and displaced the Michigammia and the Kaskaskia and Cahokia, who were friendly to white men, had no one to kill for fun and profit, so they started to murder the American settlers. And there was no real reason for it. This was not their hunting ground. They didn't live here. They simply did it because they enjoyed it. They were warlike tribes that enjoyed war, not unlike Americans. There was also a lot of profit in it, because in the years leading up to and immediately after the War of 1812, the British in Detroit paid a bounty on American citizens, so much per scalp, and they weren't really picky, man, woman, or child. They didn't really care. They also took white people as slaves. And this is a fact that probably some of you know. The term Indian summer that we look up on the beautiful 2 weeks in fall got its name because the Indians would use that last little bit of warm weather before the winter snows to come down and kill people in southern Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, hence the term Indian summer. They did not look forward to it at all. They were very vulnerable. The men were out in the fields doing the harvesting and haying, so they were separated from their homes, made both them and their loved ones at home easy prey. And in about a 2-year period in the very early 1800s, I think the hostile tribes killed probably 20% of the people in Monroe County. It was quite a few. At that time, there were about 800 American families in the state of Illinois, and 600 of them were in Monroe County or the immediate environments in southern St. Clair. So the Illinois tribes, as did the Mississippi before them, succumbed to the problems of overpopulation, depletion of resources, and their inability to defend themselves from encroachment by outsiders. lesson there for all of us at this point in time. Having run out of breath, I will now turn this over to Dennis. Thank you.
Merrill, I did notice that I think I only saw one or two people out here in the audience taking notes. And this guy gives a test at the end of his presentation. So it would probably be a good idea if from this point on you did start writing some things down. It would be a lot easier to pass later on. I've known this guy for a long time. He's always had a tremendous interest in Indians. I've worked with him for quite a few years at the courthouse. The only time it got a little bit uncomfortable, sometimes on hot summer days, he would show up in his loincloth. Was not pretty. We would all ignore him on those days, but never stop him. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the archaeology work that was involved in the relocation of Valmeyer. Even though we don't have any actual photographs that go back to the time period when this area was inhabited by the Native Americans, we can only imagine what it would have been like when our ancestors were in this area, and they lived on the river bottoms, and they also enjoyed the benefits of those things that came with the wooded bluffs that were nearby. It's the same thing that the Indian populations did. They used the best of both areas, the best of both worlds, to use the rich river bottom farm ground to produce their crops, and then also to use the wooded bluff lands to gather the nuts and hunt the wild animals and some of the other things that they needed for their food sources. Through the years, there have been a lot of people who have gotten involved in amateur archaeology, and not many to the extent of Merrill, but this, just as an example, this is a Birdman tablet that was found on the Schaefer farm just south of Valmeyer that is now on display at the Cahokia Mounds Museum. And many very interesting and very important artifacts have been found in and throughout Monroe County through the years. Merrill was mentioning the various time periods earlier. One of the things that we did find out as we were getting ready to work on the new Valmeyer was that we had some of those Ice Age people years ago. We had some of those cavemen that lived in the caves in and around Valmeyer. Don't write that down. That's not going to be on the table. The accelerated interest in archaeology definitely was a direct result of the 1993 flood in Valmeyer. And as we began to work on the plans for the relocation and all of the things that came along with it, dealing with the state and federal agencies, it became very early on, it became evident that we were going to have to deal with some archaeology work. One of the very first things that we had done, we were working with the local farm bureau, the farm service agencies, Soil and Water Conservation Service, and we were working on plans for erosion and sediment control, things like that. We wanted to make sure that we didn't adversely affect the surrounding property owners, and we wanted to have as little of a footprint on the environment as possible through the course of what we were doing. Well, as we started to meet with the archaeologists and the agencies that they were affiliated with, the first order that we got from them was plow open the entire site so we can start looking. And that didn't really ring true with what we were trying to do on the other side of things. So that was our first chance to butt heads with the agencies and try to achieve a middle ground, kind of, between both sides of the issue. And we basically wound up getting them to agree to a compromise where we opened up 50% of the site. And here you can see this was one of the original, after we had gone in and plowed open about 50% of the site so the archaeologists could make their first pass. We basically wound up with 3 major archaeological digs on the site. We went through 3 different phases of investigations. When the professional archaeologists come in, they do what's called a first phase study where they go and look at the entire area and pick up artifacts, label what they pick up and where they pick it up. And in those spots where they get the greatest concentration of artifacts, they then move on to a phase 2 study. And they kind of hone in on a smaller area. Eventually they get to what's called a phase 3 study, where they get out their toothbrushes and their small paintbrushes and they're working in extreme detail to find every little thing they can possibly find. The very first site that wound up being a phase 3 site on our Newtown complex wound up being called the Strong site, and this was named after the FEMA individual who was in running this project. His last name was Strong, so they named the site after him. But this is down in the southwest corner of the village area. For those of you who are familiar with Valmeyer, this short street right here is Andrus Court. Right here in front of the arrow is where Ranger Rich Deppendahl lives. So any of you who are familiar with the Valmeyer area know that. Right over here would be MAR Graphics, so it would be directly west of that. This is an aerial view of the area when they had started the investigations there. Again, here you can see the MAR Graphics building. It's already completed at this point. This is in probably May of '94, I would say, when the dig was to this extent. You can see this is the area. It's about a 4-acre site that they were working on at that time. And you can see here where they have tents and different things set up where they're doing their phase 3 investigation on this site. It's another picture of the group working. They spent probably about 2 months working in this area. The archaeologists were very excited about what they found on this site. It was labeled as an archaic site, and what excited them most was the extent of the materials and the information that they gathered from this site, which tied in with some of the surrounding sites. The Modoc Rock Shelter, which is down in Randolph County, is what classify as an early archaic site. The Knobloch site in southern Madison County is what is classified as a late archaic site. And the Strong site, all of the information and the materials that they gathered from that site put it into a new classification, a more complete middle archaic site. They say it was one of the most extensive middle archaic sites that they have found in the southern Illinois area. Because of that, the area, the entire phase of what they found there, they named after the hollow that goes down 156 from the Newtown to the Old Town area, and it was called the Dennis Hollow phase. And they classify that as from 6900 to 6500. In their records and in all of the reports they issue, they call it BP, which is before present. So just figure back 6900 to 6500 years. The other thing that they found a lot, and a lot of almost complete of these points that all were from the same time period. And those are a new classification of projectile point that they call the Valmeyer corner notch projectile point. So two very significant things from this particular site. The second area that required the Phase 3 investigation was called the Stemler Bluffs site. And that was right in the middle of the Newtown area. Right here on the corner is where the post office is now. The St. John Church and St. Mary Church on these two parcels. Kind of get an idea where that work took place. About a 10-acre parcel. Now this was a later parcel as far as the time period of the activity. This was considered a Mississippian site. This is an aerial view of that same area. If this was before any of the work was done there, the post office would be right here. This is where UCC Church is now, and the Catholic Church right here. You can see where the water tower is over here, and this is MAR Graphics. So we're looking from west to east across the town site here. Work on this part of the site took place throughout the summer and into the early fall of '94. Probably close to 4 months worth of very intense activity in this area. On this part of the site, throughout the course of time, there have been quite a few significant artifacts that have been found by amateurs that have hunted this area. This area was very ripe for the collection of stone axes, from what we've been told. And this is a stone pipe, a carved pipe that was found on the site many, many years before we even got there. But you can see there is a facial image that is carved into that pipe. So a lot of very significant pieces have been found there in the past. At this time, with the investigations that took place, they found a large village setting there, multiple structures, a lot of pit features where the families that inhabited the site would have stored their food products. They also would have used some of the pits for cooking, and then later on those pits would have been used for trash receptacles. Also found on the northwest corner of this particular site, on the very back end of where the Catholic Church property is now, near where the St. Mary Parish Center is, they found a mortuary feature. And here you see they are working on one of the graves that they found there. They found some limestone-lined graves. And they think that they were temporary graves, that people had been buried there, and in the course of time, something happened that the population moved on, but eventually, under normal circumstances, these remains would have been moved to Cahokia Mounds as part of more of a mass ceremonial type burial routine. The bones were left here on this particular site. The third area where we had investigations that took place, this was not until a couple of years later. In '96, we continued work out into what we call our Phase 6 area. It's an extension of Woodland Ridge. Right in this corner is where our village water tower is, and then we have homes that continue out on this kind of bluff top parcel that goes out in the middle there. And we had work that was done on that area. That again wound up being probably about 4 or 5 acre site by the time they got into the middle of the work. This was found to be a Patrick phase, which is a phase of the Mississippian period. They're saying that the time period on the activity here was from 1600 AD. And the activity here involved the periodic gathering of large social groups. There were a lot of things that they found that supported their argument with this. These are some stones over here on the left side of your screen that you see that were used for nutting, where they would actually smash or crush the hickory nuts before then they would move them into some of the pit features. And they actually had evidence in these pits that they would boil the hickory nuts to get the oil out of them for future use. One of the things that made this an extremely significant site is that the archaeologists said they found on this site the largest cache of pottery from the Patrick phase of any other investigation that they've ever done. They found more than 5,000 ceramic artifacts that were tied to ceramic pieces of pottery, to large bowls. And this is another one of the reasons that they feel that this was a site that was used for a lot of communal activity, large social groups, and a lot of ceremonial activity. That they were preparing food and collecting food in these large ceramic bowls. So it was a very significant site. The one thing that I thought was probably one of the most interesting things that they came up with, they found what was called a trench on the site. And this truss trench would have supported what they called a burial processing platform. As the people in the tribe would die, their remains would be wrapped and put on top of this platform. And through the course of time, the weather, probably rodents, whatever, the sun, would clean and eventually bleach the bones so they were completely clean. When they got to that point, they would be taken down off this platform, and then that's when they would be prepared to go through a ceremonial burial, either a temporary burial on site, or they would be gathered and taken to a common place like Cahokia Mounds for a larger burial ceremony. So it's very interesting that they found this on the site. It was very satisfying for us as a group of village officials to see all of this previous activity and know that we were not acting in the blind when we decided to relocate our town here, because apparently many thousands of years ago there were previous populations that had the same idea. I only recall 2 times that, because of the timing of things and trying to move the process along and trying to get work completed so we could get back in their homes, that I purposely instructed the fellows that were driving the earth moving equipment to chase the bone diggers. Now, I was very busy at that time, so there might have been more than 2 times that I did it, but I only remember 2. You've been a great audience. Merrill's coming back, so be kind to him. Couple more quick comments. Do they do everything when they do these investigations? No. Over the course of time, as we continued to do the, go ahead and turn the lights back on, the infrastructure installation on the Newtown site, every day when they would go out and plow the trench, I would follow them to see what they would turn up. And these are just kind of a sampling of some of the things that were still there, still popping up after the archaeologists had left. So there are still a lot of things around, and everybody keep your eyes open. The other thing that was very interesting was that in '96, spring of '96, the kids moved into the new school in Valmeyer. And about 3 or 4 weeks after they were in there, I got a call from one of the teachers who said, "Come on over here, we want to talk to you about something." Kids had been out playing on the playground that morning, and they came in with this stone axe that they had found on the playground. So we had a whole class that we labeled as amateur archaeologists for the day that day, but this was quite a find for those kids to turn up an axe like this on the playground. So, still a lot of goodies around. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Okay, we've got a few minutes yet. I'm going to show you, as I said, a few things that you don't see on just every collection that you come across. So, first thing I'm going to show you is, carry that around. This is a notched cone. It's a half of a circle, hemisphere, if you will. It has 4 notches on it, which we'll put there. They're nice, perfectly straight across from each other. I have no idea why. I have no idea when, but they did it. Cheryl and I each have a lozenge. I don't know if you can, probably can. They're not very big. Each of these, they're very thin. One is, there are 2 different types of stone. That one actually is a sort of dolomite. This one I'm not sure it is. But both of them have a tiny, almost microscopic notch right here. Last winter when they were going through my entire collection, one of the archaeologists was extremely excited about this because this was his expertise. He said they're very rare in this area. They're more prevalent on the Illinois River. He said in his career of 30 years he's seen about 20 of them. And every one of them had a notch that was just almost microscopic, but was definitely there in the same place. Yeah, that's really strange. Why? Again, I have no idea. Piece of hematite made into a perfect diamond. Little small face. This is a naturally occurring occlusion. But if you look at it after a while, you can see that they chipped 2 little eyes in it to make a little face. It's not a smiley face, it's a face. This is, unfortunately, just the head of a pop-eyed bird stone, which, if it were whole, I would not bring here because I'd be afraid I'd drop it. But since it's broken, it doesn't matter. There again, they're very rare in this area. You don't know if it was complete, it would actually be shaped not unlike a sitting bird. Ceremonial, they do have holes on them. Perhaps they started out as a counterbalance weight on spear throwers and evolved into something more decorative. This is my wife's favorite thing because she found this. It's a limestone hole. It's much better, but this is a Mississippian limestone hole. These are 2 halves of 2 unfortunately separate Banner stones. When I found one half, and about 20 years later I found the other half, I was sure I had found both halves. No such luck. Again, I have that for a second. If it was completed, it would actually look like this. Tubular hole down the center, placed on it. It was probably a diadem, symbol of authority. Again, it may have started out as an atlatl weight and then became something more, which is also what happened to the plummets we showed you earlier. They later became grave goods. Another thing I want to show you, in case you ever want to know, show you the difference between a celt and an age. A celt is tapered equally from both sides. A celt has one flat surface. An age has one flat surface. It was used for woodworking, not unlike a broad axe. This is a natural stone. The base has been worked, smoothed by the hand. It was a pottery trowel for smoothing the inside of pots. It almost matches, if you hold it in a clay pot, it almost matches the curvature of the pot, either this way or this way. Pottery trowel. Sharpening stone, simply sandstone with grooves cut where they start the points. What else do I want to show you? Nothing under that. Showed you shell beads,
Yeah.
middle woodland, flint pendants, and all made from a turkey bone. Notice it's hollow, thin, similar bird. Deer antler, squared off in the end, used for flaking of flint. I'm assuming you can all hear me if I'm not in front of the microphone. If not, come up and ask me. A drilled canine tooth, it is broken, but there is a drill hole through it. It was part of a necklace. As was this little squirrel jaw. As was this cut bone.
What they drill with, Mom?
Usually hollow reeds and sand. The sand would do the cutting, would do the twisting of the sand. This guy couldn't find a bear or something to kill, so he just made a shell into the shape of a claw so he could still wear a claw necklace even if he didn't have anything to kill him. I guess he didn't like big animals. This is a bead made of lead or galena. An undrilled, not finished bead made of calcite, which is a little unusual in this area. What else do I want to show them? I need to look one up. Oh, couple of things over here. You probably saw some of these. These are from Mississippian. A little bell face, broken off a pot. Woodpecker head, broken off a pot. This one is a little bit different. This is I thought it was a bear paw. The archaeologist told me it was hand, but it only has 4 fingers, so I think it's a bear paw. But you can see, if you look at it, it has black paint, pottery glazing. But here it's missing, but here it's glazed. It was a handle on a pot. It broke off. But instead of throwing it away, they cut a groove out of it and suspended it, probably as a pendant. So they didn't throw things away. There's probably a lot of work to make the damn thing in the first place. You heard Dennis talk about nutting stones. He showed you. This is a nutting stone, of course, not from the Valmeyer side. Plates, as I mentioned, Mississippian plates. Some of them have a lot of decoration on, some of those are plain. A lot of them are orange glaze. Use a crushed mineral for that. A piece of stumpware, which is very thick pottery. I suspect they may have been used as somewhat similar to hot plates set next to a fire to hold a smaller pot next to the flame because they're really thick, so they would not have crumbled from the heat. This box, if you look at it later, is full of middle woodland, and you can see all the different designs that they put in on their various and sundry things. This shows all points from one site. They range from Mississippian to archaic. When the archaeologists dug a test site there a couple of years ago for Ameren, they went back 4,000, 12 foot and 4,000 years. There was still stuff getting, but Ameren called the site off and put the pole there anyway. The archaeologists who spend a lot of time and money said this site should not be disturbed. We recommend you move this pole 100 feet over across the, but Ameren Electric, who has a lot of clout in Springfield, put the damn poles in the middle of the site because they wanted to. I don't know why they bothered pig archaeologists. These are all Mississippian arrowheads. And you see a large variety and a lot of different styles from the various areas. This type triangular point is called a Madison point, and strangely enough, the Kaskaskia Indians were still using it hundreds of years later, so that may be some clue as to where the Mississippian Indians went. They may have moved north and become later the Illinois tribe. This site is a big site, and it's full of artifacts, but it's only full of 3 kinds of artifacts. You don't find any axes, you don't find any chopping tools, you find eps or Riverton points, you find drills, and you find little circular things which are either scrapers, but I think they're probably just blanks that were used, trade blanks. They would carry them to their fish site and then be chipped and used at the point. This obviously was a point, a site that was used for one specific purpose, perhaps a manufacturer's point, or perhaps hunting. It lies along the oval oxbow of the river, so perhaps they were used in the hunting and stuff like that. But it was not evidently used as a general site because it's extremely limited. Only two more things to show you, I think. Oh, two more things. This is a Brandenburg rim. It's a little unusual. If you see these, you know you're in a middle woodland site. It's the only place that they are ever showed. You want to hold up a couple of these? We mentioned discarded love to all different types of discards, made of all different types. This one is perforated on one side, greenstone, limestone. They love discardals. And the last thing I want to show you, this looks nondescript. It's a soft grain limestone, similar to dolomite. Front side of it. And I found it, and it's broken up here, and it's broken here, and it's scratched here, and it's nicked here. And I took it home, and I cleaned it up, and I looked at it carefully in the light. Oh, okay. I don't know if I want to keep this, so I laid it out in the rock garden next to the driveway, and promptly forgot about it for a year or two. October of this year, we had very clear, bright, sunny day, the kind that you only get in the fall here. The sun was very bright, and I picked up this stone, and I could see a faint outline on it. So I got out a magnifying glass, even though in the light here you cannot see it, even under magnifying glass. Howsoever, in the bright light, that was the front, this was the back. This, according to archaeologist, a friend I showed it to, this cross-hatching represents the underworld. This is probably a birdman or an eagleman figure. And if you flip them end for end, you get, may I have it please? This way. If you flip this end for end, the way it was found, it shows a birdman rising from the underworld. So when you find something, look at it carefully before you throw it in the junk heap. Because I was several times in the last couple of years, I came close to just throwing that up in a pile of rocks to get rid of it. And it's only just sheer dumb luck that I did. And thank you, that's all I have. Thank you for being a good audience.
Thank you to Merrill and Cheryl and to Dennis. The presentations were wonderful, very informative. I did take notes, so I might pass the test. I'm not sure.
Joanne, you always did well in school. We have no doubt you will pass now.
There were too many words that I really didn't know what you meant by them, so I probably wouldn't pass the test.
I probably made most of them up anyway. So
I believe that completely. Again, thank you all for coming, and appreciate it. And there's brochures out there about our organization if you're not members. If you are members, thank you.
And feel
Appreciate
free to come up and look at the artifacts.
And if you have any questions, yes, please.
I have a question.
Yes.
Merrill, you found most of your stones in the bottom. Did you find any on the upland where you in your area?
yeah, there's archaic sites on the upland and others.
Yeah.
I find some, but mostly in the bottom because it's just easier to find.
Stirred the soil.
There's a lot of them by the edge of the bluff, but it's heavily covered with woods. Yes.
How did they determine who was going to be wrapped up and put on that platform?
It was a cultural thing. Some of the various culture periods did it, and some didn't. The ones who did, were they archaic? No, they were Mississippian. I did help archaeologists dig south of Valmeyer, above the bluff of Pinkel Woods, and though there were grave sites there, and they contained what was left of some of these wrap burials, because one particular grave I helped dig had 12 skulls, a couple of femurs, a few vertebrae, a couple of long arm bones, and nothing else. So this was remains, and that was what was left, and they maybe buried them all on the same, maybe buried them on the day of the summer solstice or something else, but there was some ceremonies why they did it. So, but I don't think they singled out that only the rich or the poor went there. I think it was everybody went there.
For how many years have you been collecting?
I started in 1971, and I collected it was my major hobby up until about the flood years, and after that, everybody went into no-till or minimum till. Nobody no longer moldboard plowed, so they didn't bring anything up. So I don't go as much. I still go a little bit. And I got off into my secondary hobby then of repairing old cemeteries, which I've been doing since 2000. So that takes most of that's my other archaeology. We still do go occasionally. We still do find some things. Like I said, I found this a couple of years ago, and then refound it.
Diane has a question.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to that big mountain there at Sandridge?
No,
No,
no.
because my husband and I used to see that every time we go down to Gorman and Grand Tower.
No, I did have a cousin that lived down around Ava, and I went down on his farm one time, found a few points, but it was an expensive trip because while I was rooting around in this old Indian site, I lost my class ring from Valmeyer High School.
Oh.
So someday, some archaeologist is going to and he's going to find a golden ring with a black onyx stone that says Valmeyer, class of '66, and it's going to screw up archaeology for the next hour. So, any other questions? Thank you for being a good audience. And if you want to take a few minutes to look by, that's fine with us.